Welcome back to the Rob Skinner podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no regrets life, make this life count, and multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Today is Wednesday, December 9th, 2020, and my wife and I and our 3 kids have all just tested positive for COVID. We are in the second week of recovery from COVID. It's been quite a slog to get better. We went away for Thanksgiving visiting family, and we came back and all were knocked down. And so we are pulling ourselves back together. It's been great to get as much support from people as we've received. We're super grateful for that. I hope you're well wherever you're at throughout the world. Hope you're doing well and staying healthy as you can be. We're grateful for the spiritual family we have and the friends and the support we've received. That's for sure. Today I want to talk about how to improve the quality of your thought life. As we start thinking about 2021 and growing spiritually, I feel like one of the most important things we need to cover is how to really dig deep and improve the way we think. It's kind of a difficult subject to talk about, and yet I don't think there's a more important subject to discuss, especially in light of all that's happened and the craziness of our society and what's happening with the pandemic. And so I want to talk about that. And my first subject I want to discuss is examine the quality of your thought life. You've got to take a look at what's going on between your ears, what's happening in your mind on a day-to-day basis. In Psalm chapter 19, in verse 13, David says this. He says, "May these words of my mouth and this meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, Lord, my rock and my redeemer." I love that passage because he says, listen, I want the meditation of my heart and my words to be pleasing. Now, have you ever read the Psalms or Paul's writing and thought, where'd these guys get these ideas? I mean, I can't read Psalms without a little bit of a kind of a humbling feeling like, oh my gosh, where's David getting all these ideas? Like how does he even come up with these ideas? And there's thoughts that go through my mind like, I'm not even in the same league. The insights that I read in Galatians and in Romans about God's love, it's so profound. It's so deep that it's difficult to even connect with. Of course, we understand that there's spiritual inspiration. We know that they were carried along by the Holy Spirit. That goes without saying. Nevertheless, the meditation, the thought life of these men, not just them, but also men throughout the Bible and women as well, is so deep, so profound. And so we need to look at our mindset and thought life and look inside to see spiritually limiting thoughts that keep us from knowing God more deeply. Let's be honest, for many of us, our meditation and reflection on God is shallow. It's superficial. It's as cliche as walking into a Christian bookstore and looking at the card rack. I mean, it's just, for many of us, our thinking about God is hardly more advanced than when it was when we were baby Christians. We're still saying the same prayers with the same phrases and the same phraseology. We're still thanking God for the exact same things we thanked Him for 10 years ago. And yet progress in our lives and in our ministries and our churches depends on progress in our thinking about who God is and what He's capable of. I'm absolutely convinced of that. I want you to think about Martin Luther. And if you've never read anything about, not Martin Luther King Jr., I'm talking about the original Martin Luther, the Catholic monk who started the Protestant Reformation. He was a man who was very tortured in his thinking. His conception of God was one that Jesus is a judge. Jesus is looking down. He's examining everything. He's a nitpicker. Has super high expectations, expects perfection, but he can never be satisfied. And Martin Luther got to the point where he was spending hours confessing his sin, talking about his sin. But the more he confessed, the more he realized that there was more sin below the sin he just confessed. And he came to the point where he just started to hate God, literally. And if you've ever read any of his commentaries, you'll pick that up. But he got to the point of resentment, anger, and a feeling like God is a terrible slave master who has incredibly high expectations, can never be satisfied, and is really just a terrible, terrible being. And yet he came across the powerful thought in Romans 1:17 that there's a righteousness not based on how we perform, but it's a gift from God. It's just like God credited Abraham with righteousness that he wasn't deserving of. But that one insight that we often take for granted and that we know about and oftentimes don't really think about too deeply, that transformed him so much. I mean, it revolutionized his life. That one concept that God gives a righteousness that is disconnected from our personal spiritual performance, that he gives us a standing before the Father that is essentially Jesus's own standing. And that transformed not only his life, but all of the churches in Germany and Western Europe and Western civilization. I mean, we are still living in the distant ripples of that massive tsunami of thought change. And it all started from him realizing the way I'm thinking is not worthy of God, and it's not really accurate. And when he clung to and switched over to the truth of the Bible and the incredible good news of the gospel, all of a sudden the light went on, the joy returned, and he was a brand new person. He was like born again and again. And that's the power of really digging into our thinking, is that there can be a tremendous transformation. And I believe for our churches, whether you're in a small church or a small ministry, or whether you're in a large ministry, in our family of churches around the world, there can be a total transformation. But I believe deeply that it will start not with technique, not with the latest Canon XYJ camera that you're using to stream your services. It's not a technological answer, although technology is certainly a help, and I'm not downgrading that. But it starts deeply in what we think. On a much smaller level, on a micro scale, I remember as a young Christian, I was assigned to lead a Bible discussion at a dormitory at UC Berkeley in the fall of 1987. The dormitory was Bowles Hall. It looked like a castle. It was designed like a castle. It was up on the hill next to the football stadium. And I was scared. I was terrified. I'd never led a Bible discussion before. I didn't know how to do it. I was given some brothers to work with. And we were to go into that dormitory and start a discussion and convert people. And so every day I had a part-time job. And after that part-time job, I would walk over there. And I didn't know what to do. So all I did was I repeated to myself over and over again, Matthew 28:20, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. Now that thought, that conviction, that meditation gave me the strength I needed to do something I'd never done before. And it turned out that fall, we converted 5 young men in our Bible talk. It was amazing. Now, did I have the experience? No. Did I have the confidence? No. Not really. But I did have a conviction that helped me. The one thought I clung to is, Jesus is with me. He's going before me. And even though I felt like I was Don Quixote, storming the castle, storming the windmill, I felt like, okay, God is with me. He's going to do something. And he did. Now, I struggled after that. That was a bright spot, but I had much more testing to go through after that. But it shows the power of transforming our thinking. Now, you need to take a look at your thinking and go, okay, what's going on beneath the surface, under the hood? And we need to take captive anything that's set up against the knowledge of God. This is one of the most powerful passages and insights into Paul's thinking in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3 through 5. He says, "For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ." So Paul shares here that the weapons he's fighting with are not physical, they're spiritual, they're mental, and he takes captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. He's going beneath the surface in his mind and demolishing any thought, any attitude, any belief system that would prevent him from having a deeper knowledge of God. And we've got to adopt this kind of thinking if we're going to grow as leaders and disciples, and if we're going to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. At a subconscious level, we have thoughts that are holding us back from being the great disciples and leaders God knows we can become. Now, here's some areas that we need to examine. And these are just a random sampling. Some thoughts are, does God really love me? Does he really forgive me? Many of us are walking around in our cities and we don't feel very loved. We don't feel very forgiven by God. We feel like, I don't really feel saved, so I'm going to earn God's love by growing my church or leading a good Bible talk or serving as much as I can. And the joy of the gospel that's written about, it's not something that feels natural to us. Instead, we feel like God is not super happy with us. Or we have thoughts like, I can't be happy unless the church is performing such and such a way. And this has been a terrible year during COVID, so I'm doing terrible and I feel bad. Or I can't do anything during COVID. There's nothing I can do. I'm paralyzed. Or God can't or won't help me with my situation. My church is stuck. He doesn't have the power to do it. He doesn't want to help me. I've tried to ask him before. He's ignoring me. He doesn't care about me. I don't know why, but he doesn't. Thoughts like, I'm less than others. I've heard strong leaders, people that I respect, tell me that they struggle with thoughts, I'm a fraud. I feel like a fake. I feel like if people really understood what's going on inside, they would make me step down. They would call me out. And we feel like an imposter because we are aware of our own spiritual weaknesses. Or there's other thoughts like I'm not good with technology or computers, or I'm too old, or I'm too young. I could go on, but you need to ask yourself, what's going on in your mind? What thoughts do you need to take captive that are holding you back from the knowledge of God, that keep you from being the mighty man of God or mighty woman of God that God intends? How would you feel? How would your life change? How would your ministry change if you replaced your default thoughts, those negative thoughts, with the way that Paul thought about God? Let's just take a look at a little short sampling. God is for us. If God is for us, who can be against us? Now, I know you know this because that's in the Bible. I know you've read this countless times, but I'm talking about not just knowing it, I'm talking about feeling it, really internalizing it, where you believe it. God is for me. How about the thought, I'm at peace with God? I am at peace. I can approach his throne with grace and confidence, freedom. Nothing can separate me from Jesus' love for me. Now, do you feel that? That, hey, nothing that's going on in my life is going to keep Jesus from loving me. He absolutely is crazy about me. I remember talking to a brother way back in Japan, and I shared with him my thoughts. You know, there's times I feel like I can't really live up to God's standard, and I don't feel super close to him at times. And he said, I don't get it because I always feel like I'm the apple of God's eye. And I remember just going, wow, that's exactly how I want to feel. I want to feel like I'm the apple of God's eye. And I appreciated that. And that guy's leading a church now, which is awesome. But what are some other thoughts that Paul shared? You know, we are more than conquerors. Do you feel like a conqueror in your small church or your small ministry? Hey, we're going to do it. We're going to do it in 2021. We've had some setbacks, but we are more than conquerors. Or I love this passage, Philippians 4:13. I can do everything God asked me to with the help of Christ, who gives me the strength and power. That's the Living Bible version. And I also love the Jerusalem Bible version. There's nothing I cannot master with the help of Christ who gives me strength. Now, that level of thinking is so incredibly powerful, and it's something that we need to claim as disciples. It's not just something that Paul alone owns. It's something we need to adopt since we are the the seed of Abraham and co-heirs with Christ. That's meant to be given to us as well. I think about this podcast. There was many times I thought, oh my gosh, podcast, how do I learn how to do it? This is really tough. It's technology. I don't even understand how it works. I don't know how you get an episode uploaded. But I would keep repeating to myself, there's nothing I can't master. With the help of Christ who gives me strength. I just thought to myself, hey, I can do this. If I just stick with it, I can learn what I need to learn to get a podcast up and running. And I'm really glad that I stuck to that. Or writing a book. That was overwhelming at first. Then I wrote a second book. And I share that because there were barriers in my mind that I thought, I can't do that. That's not me. I'm Generation X. I'm a little bit older. I'm at 55 now. But I go, okay, all of us have barriers. We think, I can't do that. But yes, you can. There's nothing you can't master with the help of Jesus in your life. That's a reality. Currently, I'm organizing a team for Flagstaff, which is going great. Thank you very much. There's been a lot of response. And I want to ask you, if you're interested in going to Flagstaff, Arizona, contact me. We're still looking for a leadership team. We're still praying about that. We want the right couple leading it. And so please be praying for, if you know of somebody, please call me. I will call that person and ask them if they're interested. But the Flagstaff leadership and team, it's one thing to get it started. Then you realize, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this with COVID? How's this going to happen with the money? I don't have the leader yet. There's a lot of question marks. And that's not just true in Flagstaff. That's how I felt when I planted the church in Ashland, Oregon, with no support. But I think there's nothing I cannot master with the help of Christ who gives me strength. And I look back and I realize, okay, I don't see what God is doing, but I know he's working invisibly behind the scenes. And that gives me confidence. And when I'm afraid, when I wake up sweating in the middle of the night and I'm worried about the fact that I don't know exactly what's going to happen, I've got to take a look and go, okay, that thought right there is fear. You are getting attacked by fear. You're going to need to counter that with confidence in God. And God has me exactly where he wants me to be, which is forced to be reliant on him for the answers. I can master it. So let's talk about some practicals. Let's talk about practicals today. How can you really work on your internal mental life? And this is huge. I think it starts with, first, take a stand and demand control over your mind. Take a stand and demand control over your own mind. In Galatians chapter 5, verse 1, the Bible says, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." Galatians 5, verse 1. What's going on here? These people, Paul had reached out to these people. They'd become Christians. They were solid disciples. But then some Judaizers, some people who came from a Jewish background, slipped into the church and started to spread a teaching, a way of thinking that said, yes, Jesus is important. He'll save you about 80% of the way. But then you need another 20% of obeying things from the Old Testament, things such as getting circumcised and observing certain days. And in that way, then you can make it all the way. Now, that way of thinking was so insidious and so dangerous because it totally coincides with our thinking of, hey, you've got to earn your way to do something. The gospel is not intuitive. And Paul here is telling these people, he's saying, listen, you are meant to be free. You are free right now. Why are you going back to a mental slavery where you feel like you have to do something more than God has asked you to do? So he tells them, stand firm. Don't let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. What does that tell us? It was within their area of responsibility what they were thinking and what they allowed themselves to believe. And in the same way, you have to stand firm and decide, listen, I will not allow myself to be burdened by negative thinking, faithless thinking, by negative thoughts, by thoughts of the past that hold me back, by insecurities, by fears, all the mental things that dog us and work on us in our moments of weakness. You've got to stand firm and decide, listen, I'm a child of God. There's nothing I can't do with the help of God. And that's the first part, is realizing and taking responsibility that you're not powerless. You absolutely have the strength, but it's going to take some work. And that's where I would counsel you, first of all, to spend some time in prayer and meditation. Meditation. This is very important. You've got to take some time here to do that. I would recommend reading a book on meditation. Now, I read a book probably 6 or 7 years ago by Dan Harris called 10% Happier. Dan Harris was a major broadcaster in one of the big broadcasting companies, NBC or CBS. But he had a drug problem that caused him to kind of have a meltdown on screen during one of his broadcasts. And that forced him to really think deeply about what he was doing and where he was going in his life. And so he started meditating. Now, and he writes about it in his book, and it really helped him. That's why he calls it 10% Happier. Since he's meditated, he feels like he's 10% happier. Now, whenever I start talking about meditation, I'm always nervous, because for many of us, especially older people, there's an association with Eastern religion that it's like, oh, there that person's going all woo-woo, and he's gonna wear, have long hair, and he's gonna wear, tie-dyed shirts and stuff like that, and smoke marijuana or something. Okay, meditation is a neutral practice. Christian meditation goes. If you'll ever look in the commentary or the concordance in the Bible, meditation goes all the way back. The very first scripture I shared today, may the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight. Okay, Psalm 119 talks about, I know more than all of my teachers because I meditate on your word. Meditation is a spiritual practice. It's absolutely neutral, regardless of whether you're in the East or in the West, or Christianity or Buddhism or whatever. But I'd recommend it because I would best compare it to like spiritual or mental exercise. Like, some of us listening right now, you like to work out, you like to go to the gym. I like to do that. I really enjoy working out. And we understand the concept. You go to the gym, you exercise, you don't like it necessarily, but you like what it does for you. You like how it feels afterwards. Meditation is like exercise for the mind, and especially it helps you to concentrate. This is a weakness for me because I've never been diagnosed, but I would not be surprised if I ever did go in for a doctor's analysis that I have ADD or ADHD. I'm a person that likes to come up with lots of ideas. Thoughts are running through my head at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I'm always coming up with ideas. I can get hyper-focused at times and then very distracted. I can have my wife talking to me and she's like, hey, I'm talking to you, and I'll be totally spaced out thinking about something else. But meditation, to me, I view it as mental exercise that forces me to concentrate on one thing at a time. Now, the reason why I started getting into this, I probably started looking into it maybe 10 years ago. I remember when I was reading some books on it when I was living in Oregon. So at least 8 years, but I would say probably about 10 years when I started to really think more deeply about it. Because one of the weaknesses in my life is I've seen great leaders that I've been around have one quality that I've always desired to have: the ability to give people their full attention. When I was a baby Christian, the leader of my church in Berkeley, I was there at UC Berkeley, was Tom Brown. Tom Brown now leads a church in Atlanta, Georgia, one of the churches there. But one of the gifts he had was whenever I spoke to him after a sermon, and I'd always speak to him because I was always blown away by his lessons, he would look at me and talk to me as if I were the only person in the room. And I felt so special. And I don't even remember what he's saying, but the only thing I do remember is he made me feel special because he was focused on me and made me feel like I was the center of the world. And I love that feeling. But the problem is that when I would talk to people, I'd be looking over their shoulder. I'd be looking at my watch. I'd be tapping my toes. I'd be crossing my arms. I'd be nodding my head. And I'd be thinking, I need to go talk to that person, not the person in front of me. And I realized that's a huge weakness because it shows a lack of love for the person who's sitting in front of me right there and then and there. And so I thought, I think meditation may help me because I feel like I need to concentrate. I need to be able to concentrate on one thing at a time without distraction. And that's where it is like magic. It is powerful. But it doesn't, just like working out in the gym, it doesn't happen overnight. You don't see gains first time you meditate. In fact, at the very beginning, it's so frustrating. Most people start it and then quit it. I would start by taking 30 minutes or even just 5 minutes and just sitting quietly. And what you'll find is it's incredibly difficult to sit for 5 minutes and just sit there quietly, because immediately you'll go, I need some coffee. I need to go turn off this light. Oop, my desk is disheveled. I need to go organize it. And your mind starts racing, and you realize how much your mind is thinking about things that are driving you. And that's the very practice itself. And I'll probably get into this more in depth, but I've read a lot of books by Brian Tracy, and one of the things he would always share in his books are just go into the silence, just sit quietly for 60 minutes. But when I would do that, I would just go, this is so incredibly hard. In fact, I was reading a book called So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport, I believe his name is. But he shared about a research study that these people did. And it was a study. They said, listen, all we want you to do is to sit quietly for 20 minutes and think pleasant thoughts. That was the essence of the study. But prior to that, they had hooked them up to some apparatus that was attached to their arm and administered an electric shock to each person. And then they just left the apparatus there. And then they told them, okay, for the next 20 minutes, what we would really like you to do is just think pleasant thoughts. They said, now, we know that this is still attached to you, and you can use it if you want to, but it's up to you either way. Well, what they found is that 66% of the people voluntarily shocked themselves. And it wasn't just a little light shock. I mean, it was a good shocker, like touching the wall socket. It was a shock. One person did it over 190 times over the next 20 minutes. What's the point of the study? Is that people would rather do something, anything, even if it's painful, than just sitting quietly with their own thoughts. And this is something that Blaise Pascal said in his book, Pensies. He said, essentially, man's problems boil down to the fact that they're unable to sit in a room quietly by himself. And it's very difficult. And yet that's the exercise that I would encourage you to start working on. Get curious about your thinking. What will happen is if you sit quietly for a little bit, you'll sit there and go, okay, I don't want to think about anything. Okay. And all of a sudden these thoughts will start coming into your mind, and it'll be like you're watching a movie in your mind, and you'll get caught up, and then you realize, oh my gosh, 5 minutes has just passed. And you realize how dominant your thinking is. Our minds are like thought generating machines. But what most practices recommend is just focus on your breathing. Just think about your breath coming in and going back out. And when a thought comes in, just recognize it, but then go back to your breathing. And that is the exercise. Now, a lot of times we get frustrated because we go, oh my gosh, I can't do it. I can't think, my mind is not at peace. That's the point. The point is there's all these things going on, and the strength is developed when you break away from that thought and go back to where you're trying to concentrate, which is your breathing. And that is the healthy practice. And so one thing that I like to do is just simply count to 30 as I focus on my breathing. I'll just count, 1, and then as I breathe out, I'll just think 1, and then my second breath, that'll be 2. And I'll just try to get 30 breaths in. And it's frustrating because a lot of things will come along. I'll be worried about something coming up, or I'll be regretting something that's happened in the past. And you'll realize there are a lot of negative thoughts that go on in your mind. And all you have to do, don't judge it. Just go, wow, that's a negative thought right there. Boom. And it's there, but don't worry about it. And I'm going to talk more about this in the future because I feel like it's such a powerful thing. But one of the other things that I really enjoyed during that time is after I've just settled my mind, because after about 15 or 20 minutes, you will notice that your mind does settle down a little bit. And that's when I'll start thinking about God. and thinking about how great he is, how powerful he is, how I'm the luckiest man in the world, how there's nothing I can't do. And I'll start thinking about the promises of God, and I'll start bringing in all the blessings that I know about. And I'll start choosing my thoughts and start pulling in. I call that opening up my treasure box, because in Christ, that's where all the treasures of life are. It's in Christ. And it's only during that time that I can really pull in and start developing, okay, I am so blessed by God. Now, I'd like to ask you to just give it a shot and to think about it. If we're going to have an amazing 2021, and I believe we are together, if you're going to see amazing things happen in your life, in your ministry, your marriage, if you want to get married, I don't know, whatever it might be, it all starts with your mind, with your level of faith. And it starts with, number one, recognizing that there's a lot of negative thoughts. And when those negative thoughts come up, just recognize, just go, oh, that's a crazy thought. I never realized that. Get curious about your own thinking. And then start replacing it with spiritual thoughts from the Bible and great promises. Now, this is just a short intro, but I hope it's helped you to figure out, okay, how can I improve the quality of my thought life in 2021? I want to thank you so much for listening to the Rob Skinner podcast. It's fantastic. And one of the encouraging things is just seeing how people are listening from around the world in so many different countries. And the positive responses I'm getting have been fantastic. If you'd like to find out more, contact me. You can reach me at rob@tucsonchurchofchrist.org. That's TUCSON, churchofchrist.org. My goal is to inspire you to make this life count, live a no-regrets life, multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day, and make this life count.